Hello fellow patient gamers, Jarek Defiler here with a short video to discuss the differences and my personal opinion on pre-ordering versus early access from the perspective of a patient gamer. Pre-ordering is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll give a quick snippet of what it entails for those who might not be familiar. However, early access might mean different things to different people, as there are multiple ways to gain early access to games still in development. So a quick rundown of pre-ordering. Pre-ordering is when you pay the developer/studio for the game in advance of its release date. This is usually granted with incentives such as collector's items, cosmetics, or in-game currency or items, sometimes even an early start to the game, or an early access in a way, that will be like 1 to 3 days before everyone else. Consider it a full price deposit. Early access, on the other hand, is when the customer will pay for, well, early access. However, this is not simply 1 to 3 days like some pre-order options, but usually months to years before the game's official 1.0 release. In early access, you are essentially taking part in the development of the game by providing feedback to the developer as well as suggestions that may or may not be implemented in the game. It all depends on the developer and you as the customer. Some players are more hands-on with early access, taking part in developer Q&As, forums, Steam discussions, and more, while more casual players may just pay to play and then forget. Neither is right, neither is wrong, it's simply each to their own. Now, as a patient gamer, I'm fairly strict when it comes to when I purchase new games. My general guideline is I don't buy games less than 6 months old from release, but that brings into question what do I do when it comes to early access. After all, the game isn't officially released yet, right? Well, for me, I consider early access to be the release of the game. Sure, you might not have full access to the entirety of the game with all its content, there might be issues and bugs and whatnot, but the thing is, that's the deal with almost every new release nowadays. The days where big studios release completely finished games that are fully optimized for one price is over. Major AAA titles have become known to release janky, buggy, unfinished games as of late. Fueled by marketing hype, they sucker in the customer with fancy cinematic trailers showing all this mind-blowing footage that you'll never see in-game, only to release with subpar performance, unfulfilled promises, and often just bad gameplay. The recent releases The Lord of the Rings Gollum and Redfall are prime examples of that. So when I see an indie studio with their little game on early access for years, I don't shy away from it. I see it mainly as a means to help fund the project, but also allow the player base to get some hands-on experience with it as it's developed. This can be both good and bad, but at the end of the day, it's up to the player to do their due diligence with early access titles and buy or not buy accordingly. Which brings me back to pre-ordering. As a patient gamer, and just a gamer in general really, I find that it is never a good idea to pre-order games for a variety of reasons. Number 1, you are paying for a product that no one outside of the developers has actually played. Don't let the marketing hype fool you. That fancy trailer they spent 3/4 of their budget on is not an accurate representation of the actual game. And big studios are rarely ever transparent in the true information they give to customers. They often only discuss the highlights and positives, leaving the more negative and unwanted aspects of the game back in the office. Number 2, you are incentivizing studios to release half-assed games because they already have your money. Why would they need to work their butts off to create an optimal product if so many people are willing to give them money before it's even released? This epitomizes modern gaming studios' philosophy of release now, fix later. That's not good for the developers, that's not good for the studio even, and it sure as hell isn't good for you, the paying customer. I mean, they don't even fix the games half the time. Number 3, pre-ordering screws with the metrics. When you have a game that sells tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of copies before release, and then it ends up sucking, well, the numbers are in. It sold fantastically, so it can't be all bad, right? Or it's still considered a success given the numbers, and the studio can just do the same thing again in the future because their shareholders are happy. Because at the end of the day, they already got your money. And number 4, all the aforementioned reasons are harmful to the gaming industry as a whole. Studios' reputations get tarnished, rightfully so, but when they come out with a good game, everyone is skeptical now because they don't want to get burned again. Who am I kidding? Gamers never learn. Look at how many copies of Gollum sold. It made the top 10 for that week. But still, pre-ordering is just bad, so please, never do it, guys. That said, I still have faith in us. I think if we all talk about it enough and get this mentality driven into the minds of our fellow gamers, we can turn this thing around, baby. Vote with your wallet. Do your due diligence. I've been saying it for years. With the power of the internet these days, there is no reason gamers shouldn't have the resolve to do a bit of digging before they make a purchase. Sure, sometimes studios will just outright lie, but mostly it's hard to do nowadays as everything is recorded or written down somewhere, and the internet never forgets. Unfortunately, us gamers do. A lot. Now, with all that said, what do I, as a patient gamer, feel about early access? Pre-ordering is always a bad idea in my book, but is early access okay? Is it harmful to the industry? Well, I don't think so. In my mind, early access is basically an overglorified beta. You generally gain access to the full release, with some exceptions such as Baldur's Gate 3, which is coming out soon and looking awesome by the way, and you can participate in the game's development by providing feedback and suggestions to the developers. Also, if warranted, you can warn others not to take the plunge before the game's released, which is paramount in protecting our more casual gaming brothers and sisters who may not have the time or the know-how to investigate said games. But there are some downsides to early access as well. For instance, developers may use the early access umbrella as a kind of scapegoat. Any criticism for the game's content, bugs, bad writing, or just downright crappy gameplay, and they throw their hands up in the air saying, "Well, it's still in early access," despite it having been in early access for literally years. Like I've mentioned in prior videos, there are still early access titles on Steam that have been there since 2013. Another negative with early access is the possibility of the game failing and never fully releasing. This seems rare, but it does happen. People will pay in, thinking they're helping to fund the project, and then the developer loses interest, goes on to another project, or dies or something. It's always a possibility, but like I said, I think that's more the exception than the rule. But one great thing about early access is that there generally is multiple ways for you to gain that access, not just in Steam. You have places like Patreon, if you trust them or not, that allow you to fund a developer's project directly, often allowing them to make up their own incentives, which usually involves subscribers getting access to the game before others, or taking part in surveys, Q&As, and developer discussions that allow players to make suggestions and give feedback. Sometimes the developer may set up a PayPal or donate system on their website that allows you to gain access to the game with added benefits as well. The difference between this and pre-ordering is that you gain access to the game on purchase. You aren't waiting, you don't have to rely on possibly fake hype and marketing gimmicks, and the developers tend to be more transparent with early access releases since anyone can play it, allowing customers to make a more informed purchase. Breakdown. Sunlight truly is the best disinfectant. So overall, I think you see where I'm coming from. Of course, at the end of the day, it's all up to you, the customer, the player, the gamer. I just hope I've made a decent case against pre-ordering at least, and why I think early access is mostly just an early release, if you will. And in no way, shape, or form was this video made in order to justify my future purchase of Baldur's Gate 3 on early access. But in all seriousness, I think early access is harmless and has helped to fund many a great game, such as Valheim, Satisfactory, and Factorio, among others. It grants a boon to indie developers struggling to get their hard work out to the masses. Just be sure to do your due diligence. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you agree. Dislike if you don't. No hard feelings. This has been Jarek Defiler, the Patient Gamer, hopefully changing some minds out there. You all have a great week and take it easy.